It was the night my world shattered. The night I learned my parents could choose a wedding over their own daughter's life. I was 28, sitting in a sterile hospital room with the sharp smell of antiseptic in my nose, IV dripping steadily into my arm, staring at the empty chair where my mom should have been holding my hand and my dad should have been whispering words of comfort. Instead, they were at my sister's wedding, laughing and celebrating, completely oblivious to the chemo that was eating away at me from the inside. Every beep of the heart monitor felt like a countdown, and every ring of my phone, a cruel reminder that my family had abandoned me when I needed them most. My hands trembled as I scrolled through photos of their joyous smiles on social media, and I could feel the anger and disbelief building in my chest, a storm of betrayal I had never imagined facing. If this story speaks to your heart, please hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your city or country and the local time you're watching. Only if this story truly resonates with you. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28 years old, and this was the night that changed everything in my family, the night that would redefine the meaning of loyalty and love. As I took a shaky breath and tried to focus on the small window overlooking the city lights, I knew I had to start from the very beginning, to trace back to the moments that led me here, to the place where everything truly began. The next morning, the fluorescent lights of the hospital room cast a harsh glare on everything, making the walls feel colder and more impersonal than they ever had before. Emily Carter lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the rhythmic hum of the air conditioning blending with the occasional distant chatter from the nurse's station. Every hour felt like an eternity, and each minute seemed heavier than the last. She reached for the small stack of cards and letters she had received from friends and colleagues, reminders that some people still cared, but the absence of her parents loomed like a shadow she could not shake. Her phone vibrated with a text from Jason, apologizing for not being able to leave the base, and she felt a mix of frustration and helplessness bubbling up inside her. Her sister Sophie's wedding pictures had started circulating online, and there they were, Richard and Linda smiling brightly, toasting with champagne, completely unaware that their daughter was fighting for her life miles away. Emily remembered the countless times her parents had compared her to Sophie, the unspoken expectations, the subtle comments about how Sophie was more responsible, more graceful, more deserving of attention. It had been a lifetime of little cuts, but now the wound was wide open and raw. She thought about her younger brother Daniel, who had once tried to console her after one particularly harsh argument, only to retreat when he realized there was nothing he could do to change their priorities. The isolation pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe as she thought about how her family had always chosen appearances over their own flesh and blood. Even Margaret, her stepmother, had sent a polite but detached message wishing Emily good luck, as if the severity of her condition were a minor inconvenience rather than a life-altering struggle. Chloe and Ethan, her step-siblings, were oblivious to the gravity of the situation, running around the house with laughter that sounded distant and irrelevant. Emily closed her eyes and tried to recall a memory when she had felt truly supported, but the images that came up were fleeting: a birthday party with her father trying to smile through stress, a small moment of pride from her mother, quickly overshadowed by criticism. Each recollection seemed to highlight just how far removed her family had been from providing real comfort or stability. The nurses checked her vitals periodically, each beep and click reminding her that she was alone in facing a battle that should have felt shared. She remembered the first day of chemotherapy, the way the antiseptic smell had made her stomach churn, the faint metallic taste in her mouth, and the sharp sting as the needle was inserted. There was no hand to hold, no comforting words, only the sterile routine and the faint hum of machinery. Emily felt a surge of anger that mingled with sorrow, realizing that her family's choice to prioritize a wedding over her well-being was a deliberate, conscious decision. She had always suspected that they were capable of putting obligations and appearances above genuine care, but to see it manifest so brutally in this moment was almost unbearable. She thought about the conversations that had happened months before, the subtle suggestions that Sophie's accomplishments were more noteworthy, that her needs were secondary, that she should be grateful for what she had, rather than expect attention. That gratitude felt hollow now, as the very people who were supposed to champion her had abandoned her at the most critical time. Emily pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, trying to hold herself together as the tears she refused to shed earlier now threatened to fall freely. She could feel the betrayal as a physical weight, pressing her into the hospital bed, reminding her that she had no choice but to face this ordeal alone. The sense of injustice was overwhelming, each memory and observation feeding into a narrative of neglect and partiality that had defined her life up until now. She recalled the voices of her friends, colleagues, and a few distant relatives offering support, but their encouragement was tempered by the reality that her immediate family had failed her when it mattered most. Emily realized that the strength she had cultivated through her military training was the only thing standing between her and complete despair. The discipline, the focus, the mental toughness she had honed over years became her lifeline in the absence of parental care. She focused on each breath, each heartbeat, acknowledging the pain and disappointment, but refusing to let it dictate the outcome. The room was quiet now, save for the subtle hiss of oxygen and the occasional shuffle of a nurse's shoes. Emily reached for her journal, pulling it close to record her thoughts, her fears, and her small victories of the day. Each word she wrote was a reclaiming of agency, a defiance against the neglect that had defined this chapter of her life. As she wrote, she thought about the long months ahead, the appointments, the treatments, the moments of weakness, and the moments where she would have to draw upon every ounce of resilience she possessed. She thought about the moments where she would have to act as her own advocate, make decisions, and maintain hope, even when it felt impossible. The weight of abandonment, the sting of betrayal, and the profound sense of isolation became fuel for her determination, rather than reasons to give up. Emily understood that she could not change the past, could not force her parents to be different, but she could control how she faced the challenge ahead. That night, she resolved to honor her own needs first, to prioritize her survival, and to cultivate a life where her worth was not measured by her family's approval or neglect. The hospital room, once a place of fear and vulnerability, became a space of quiet empowerment, where Emily realized that even in solitude, she could find strength. The cold walls and the sterile air could not diminish the determination that now coursed through her veins. She would emerge from this not only surviving, but stronger, wiser, and more capable of defining her own destiny. Every tear shed, every pang of anger, and every moment of loneliness was transformed into clarity about what mattered most: her life, her resilience, and the unyielding belief that she was more than the sum of her parents' choices. This realization did not erase the pain, but it gave her purpose, a path forward, and the understanding that the betrayal she endured would never define her. Only the choices she made in response could. Emily Carter woke up to the faint glow of the city lights filtering through the blinds, a reminder that the world outside continued moving while she felt frozen in time. She shifted slightly, wincing at the soreness from the previous day's chemotherapy session, every movement a reminder of the battle being waged inside her body. The hospital room was quiet, except for the rhythmic beeping of the machines, each sound echoing in her ears and amplifying the loneliness she felt. She thought about Jason, her husband, who had called early this morning with a strained voice, explaining that he would not be able to visit until later that evening because of a sudden deployment briefing. Her chest tightened, a mixture of longing and frustration swirling within her as she realized that at this moment she was entirely on her own. The absence of her parents loomed large, their decision to attend Sophie's wedding instead of being by her side an unspoken declaration of where their priorities lay. Emily's mind wandered to the countless small incidents over the years, the subtle comparisons, the quiet favoritism that had made her feel like an afterthought in her own family. Each memory was a sting, each recollection another layer of hurt that compounded the current ordeal. She sat up slowly and reached for the small stack of medical notes and appointment reminders on the nightstand, flipping through them methodically to plan her week, knowing that she had to maintain control over what she could. The thought of losing that control, of letting her illness dictate the terms, was unacceptable to her. Emily remembered a conversation with a fellow officer a few weeks back, where she had shared her fears about being alone during this process, and the advice given was simple but powerful. Focus on what you can manage, and let the rest unfold as it will. That guidance became her anchor, and she took a deep breath, steadying herself against the emotional wave that threatened to overwhelm her. Her eyes lingered on the corner of the room where a small vase of flowers had been left by a neighbor, a gesture of kindness that contrasted sharply with the absence of her own family. She traced the petals with her eyes, imagining that they were a symbol of the support she had to cultivate from outside the immediate circle of her parents. The day passed slowly, marked by routine checks, medication schedules, and fleeting moments of self-reflection. Emily found herself thinking of her brother Daniel, who had always been quiet and withdrawn, but had called the night before just to check in, offering a few words of encouragement before excusing himself, leaving her with the knowledge that some family members tried in their own way. Even if imperfectly, the contrast between Daniel's cautious concern and the overt neglect of Richard and Linda was stark, a reminder that loyalty and care did not always follow bloodlines. She thought about her stepmother Margaret and her step-siblings, Chloe and Ethan, and the way they occupied the house with laughter and noise that was entirely disconnected from the gravity of Emily's condition. She realized that empathy and attention were choices, not entitlements, and that she had to actively seek the support she needed. As evening approached, Emily's thoughts turned to the future, to the months of treatment ahead, the necessary appointments, and the moments when she would feel weakest. She understood that resilience was not just about enduring the physical challenges, but also navigating the emotional minefield created by the people who should have stood by her. The window reflected the glow of the city skyline, and she imagined stepping out into that world once more, not as the person defined by neglect, but as someone who had endured and emerged stronger. Each breath she took was deliberate, a conscious act of self-preservation, and each thought about her past, a tool to forge a better path forward. Emily felt a flicker of determination, a sense that she could reclaim control over her life, despite the abandonment she had suffered. That night, the hospital room transformed in her mind into a sanctuary of strength, a place where she could gather herself, confront the realities of her situation, and plot a course toward recovery. The isolation, the betrayal, the hurt, all became components of a larger lesson about trust, self-reliance, and the importance of cultivating inner strength. Emily reminded herself that this experience, as painful as it was, would not define her. Her choices in response to adversity, her persistence in the face of neglect, and her ability to maintain hope were what would ultimately shape her story. She envisioned the months ahead, the challenges that would come, and the victories, both small and significant, that she would claim along the way. In that quiet room, under the cold, artificial lights, Emily Carter made a silent vow to herself. She would face the storm with courage, she would honor her own needs, and she would emerge with a sense of empowerment that no betrayal could diminish. Each moment of solitude was no longer a reminder of what she had lost, but a testament to the resilience she was cultivating, a preparation for the day she would stand firmly on her own, unshaken and resolute, ready to define her life on her own terms. The next morning, Emily Carter woke up to the soft hum of the hospital, the sunlight stretching its fingers through the blinds and painting the room with a pale glow. She shifted on the crisp sheets, muscles sore from yesterday's treatment, and reached for her journal, the pen trembling slightly in her hand as she attempted to articulate the swirl of emotions that had kept her awake most of the night. The quiet was broken only by the faint shuffle of nurses making their rounds, each step a reminder that life outside these walls carried on indifferently. Emily thought about Jason again, imagining him poring over briefing notes at the base, his voice distant in her memory as he had tried to reassure her that everything would be fine. But no reassurance could erase the emptiness left by her parents' absence, a chasm that had been growing for years, filled now with the weight of her diagnosis. She thought about Sophie's wedding, the photos she had scrolled through obsessively, the laughter and clinking glasses that had replaced what should have been concern for her own well-being. The realization that her parents had chosen appearances over their daughter's survival was a knife twisting deeper with each recollection. She closed her eyes and tried to draw strength from her military training, the disciplined routines that had prepared her to face challenges head-on. She pictured herself in formation, standing at attention, breathing steady, mind-focused, determined not to allow the chaos of neglect to infiltrate her resolve. A soft knock at the door drew her attention, and a nurse entered with a tray of medications and a warm smile, her presence small but significant in this otherwise sterile environment. Emily managed a faint smile, grateful for any semblance of care and human connection, however fleeting. The nurse left, and Emily returned her attention to the view outside, the city bustling far below, a reminder that the world beyond the hospital was still vibrant and full of life, even if she felt temporarily suspended between moments of fear and moments of hope. Her thoughts turned inward, reflecting on past conversations with her father, Richard, and mother, Linda, the subtle ways in which they had consistently prioritized Sophie over her, the unspoken messages that had been reinforced over decades. The memories were painful, yet they provided clarity about the patterns she had endured, and she realized that understanding those patterns was a key part of reclaiming power over her life. Emily thought of Daniel, who had quietly supported her when he could, his words of encouragement, a small but meaningful counterpoint to the larger absence she had felt from her parents. She considered the role of her stepmother, Margaret, whose focus remained on her own children, Chloe and Ethan, leaving Emily to navigate her struggles largely unsupported. The isolation sharpened her self-awareness, reinforcing the importance of cultivating inner strength and seeking support from those who genuinely cared. As the day progressed, Emily navigated her routine with deliberate care, monitoring her vitals, managing medication schedules, and engaging in exercises recommended by her physical therapist to maintain stamina and resilience. Each task, no matter how small, became an act of defiance against the abandonment she had experienced, a demonstration of her ability to sustain herself in the absence of familial support. She reflected on the importance of mental endurance, visualizing each challenge as a mountain to climb, each treatment as a step toward reclaiming agency over her body and life. Even the moments of fatigue and nausea were transformed into opportunities to practice patience, focus, and fortitude, reinforcing her growing conviction that she could withstand more than anyone might have expected. The glow from the window intensified as afternoon shifted into evening, casting elongated shadows across the room, and Emily allowed herself a rare moment of introspection, pondering what it meant to truly stand alone yet remain unbroken. She thought about the months ahead, filled with medical appointments, treatments, and the emotional labor of navigating her family dynamics, and she resolved to meet each moment with courage and clarity. The sense of betrayal she had carried, the absence of parental guidance and concern, became a lens through which she assessed every decision, ensuring that she acted in her own best interest, rather than relying on those who had consistently let her down. The day culminated in a quiet reflection on the life she was determined to build, a life not defined by neglect, but by resilience, agency, and self-respect. Emily understood that each breath, each careful step, each decision to persevere reinforced the foundation she was constructing for her future, one in which she held control over her destiny. She felt the beginnings of empowerment stir within her, the knowledge that despite abandonment and betrayal, she could create a world in which she was safe, valued, and strong. As the sun set, painting the room with a soft amber hue, Emily Carter sat quietly in her hospital bed, her gaze steady, her resolve unwavering, and a clear sense of purpose emerging from the shadows of past pain and current challenges, guiding her toward the long, difficult, but ultimately transformative journey that lay ahead. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds once again, but today it felt different, sharper somehow, as if it were highlighting every imperfection, every fault line in the life Emily Carter had been forced to navigate alone. She shifted in her hospital bed, the sterile sheets rustling softly beneath her, and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe, acknowledging the physical fatigue and emotional weight she carried. Her thoughts immediately drifted back to her parents, Richard and Linda, and the wedding they had chosen over her well-being, and she felt the familiar burn of frustration mixed with sorrow. Every detail replayed in her mind: the gleaming hall, Sophie's laughter echoing through the grand venue, her parents' smiles fixed on photos and social media, and the absence of even a single word of encouragement, a simple gesture of concern for her life and struggle. Emily felt a surge of anger at the injustice of it all, the way her own suffering had been ignored, minimized, as if her presence and pain were irrelevant. She thought about Jason, who had called yet again with apologies, caught between duty and devotion, and though she understood the constraints of his service, it did not lessen the ache of solitude. The room felt colder now, the hum of machinery and occasional footsteps outside serving as a reminder that she was physically supported but emotionally alone. Emily picked up her journal and began to write, letting the words flow unchecked, a stream of consciousness that allowed her to process the layers of neglect, disappointment, and the faintest glimmer of empowerment that had been growing steadily over the past days. She thought about Daniel, her brother, whose cautious kindness had offered small moments of comfort, and contrasted it sharply with the deliberate choices of her parents, the favoritism towards Sophie, the long pattern of emotional neglect that had been reinforced in subtle ways since childhood. Margaret, her stepmother, and her children Chloe and Ethan seemed completely removed from the gravity of Emily's illness, their world untouched by the severity of her struggle, a stark reminder that family ties could not be assumed to guarantee care. Emily wrote about the patterns she had noticed, the repeated moments where her needs had been secondary, where appearances mattered more than genuine support. Each observation strengthened her resolve. She began to recognize that her survival and well-being could not depend on the choices of others, that she alone had the power to navigate this path. The day unfolded slowly, marked by medical assessments, the administration of treatments, and periods of quiet reflection that Emily had come to cherish as opportunities to fortify her mind. She paid close attention to every sensation, every fluctuation in energy or mood, learning to anticipate her body's responses and respond with deliberate care. Small victories, a lesson nausea, a completed exercise, a moment of laughter with a nurse became anchors in the midst of isolation, reminders that she was capable of persistence and resilience. As the afternoon stretched on, Emily visualized herself standing outside this hospital, healthy, strong, and independent, imagining the freedom and agency she would reclaim when her treatment was complete. The longing for parental validation remained, but she realized that it could not define her choices or her worth. It was merely a variable in a larger equation of self-determination. She considered the months ahead, planning carefully, organizing her schedule, and creating small milestones to track progress, each a testament to her ability to control what she could in a situation that otherwise felt chaotic and unpredictable. The hum of the ventilator and beeping monitors, once symbols of vulnerability, had become a rhythm she could synchronize with, a reminder that she could find order and focus amid adversity. Emily allowed herself to feel the emotions, fully the betrayal, the frustration, the loneliness, but she refused to let them dominate her, channeling them instead into motivation, a fuel that would sustain her throughout treatment and beyond. The evening light shifted to a softer glow, casting gentle shadows across the room, and she paused to reflect on the subtle victories of the day, maintaining composure, advocating for her needs, and reinforcing her inner strength. The silence of the hospital became a companion rather than a void, a space in which she could prepare mentally and emotionally for what was to come. In this quiet, Emily Carter reaffirmed her commitment to herself, recognizing that while she could not alter the past, she could shape her response, nurture her resilience, and lay the foundation for a future defined not by neglect but by empowerment. She visualized the steps she would take, the support she would seek from those who genuinely cared, and the life she would cultivate with clarity, independence, and dignity. The weight of abandonment and the sting of betrayal had been transformed into a driving force, a catalyst for growth, and as night approached, she felt a subtle but powerful shift within, a sense that despite the challenges and the absence of her parents, she was beginning to reclaim her life, one deliberate, conscious choice at a time, and that each moment of solitude was now an opportunity to forge strength, courage, and unwavering determination that would guide her through the difficult journey ahead and beyond. Emily Carter woke to the soft hum of the hospital machines, their consistent rhythm, a strange comfort amid the whirlwind of emotions that had defined the past few weeks. She flexed her fingers, wincing at the stiffness, the faint soreness, a reminder of yesterday's treatment, but she greeted it with a quiet determination, knowing that each small discomfort was a step toward survival. The sunlight spilling through the blinds created long, warm lines across the floor, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine a world beyond these sterile walls, one where laughter and support were constants rather than exceptions. She thought of Jason, who had managed to visit briefly the night before, bringing a smile that flickered like a fragile flame in her heart, a reminder that connection could exist even in the most challenging circumstances. Yet her mind inevitably returned to her parents, Richard and Linda, and the stark absence of their care when she needed it most. Their choice to attend Sophie's wedding instead of standing beside her in the hospital room had left an indelible mark, a mixture of hurt, disbelief, and simmering anger that Emily could not ignore. Every detail of that night replayed vividly, the photos of their smiling faces, the cheers and applause captured in video clips online, and the knowledge that she had faced the onset of cancer treatments alone, without the people who were supposed to prioritize her well-being. She reflected on the patterns that had defined her relationship with them for decades, the subtle preferences, the unspoken comparisons that always placed Sophie in the spotlight and her own needs in the shadows. Those realizations did not make the pain any less acute, but they helped Emily understand that the betrayal was part of a broader dynamic, one she had now the clarity to navigate with intention. She opened her journal and began to write, each word a deliberate assertion of presence and autonomy, a small but powerful act of reclaiming agency over her own narrative. The simple act of recording her thoughts allowed her to process the mixture of grief, anger, and resolve that swirled within her, transforming feelings of helplessness into determination. Emily thought about Daniel, her brother, who had quietly offered support where he could, his gestures small but meaningful in the absence of parental involvement. His presence reminded her that family could take many forms, and that care and loyalty were not guaranteed by birth alone. Margaret, her stepmother, and her step-siblings, Chloe and Ethan, were still largely absent from the sphere of her immediate struggle, absorbed in their own lives, yet Emily realized she did not require their validation or attention to continue moving forward. The afternoon passed slowly, marked by routines of medication administration, vitals checks, and reflection. Each activity became a meditation on resilience, a practice of asserting control over what was within her reach, while acknowledging the uncontrollable nature of illness and human choices. Emily visualized her recovery in vivid detail, imagining the moment she would walk out of the hospital on her own terms, healthy, strong, and empowered. She reflected on the months ahead, the appointments, the therapies, the challenges that would test not only her body but her spirit, and she accepted that strength was built in the small, seemingly mundane actions as much as in the victories that would later be celebrated. The weight of parental neglect, the sting of betrayal, and the isolation she felt were no longer merely sources of pain, but became elements she could harness to sharpen her focus and deepen her resolve. The rhythmic beeping of monitors, the soft rustle of sheets, the occasional murmur from the hallway, all of it became part of a symphony of endurance, a soundtrack to the life she was choosing to reclaim. As evening approached, the room shifted into a softer light, and Emily paused to reflect on the journey she had undertaken thus far, the inner battles she had fought quietly, and the realization that the capacity to endure, to persist, and to grow came from within. Every breath she took, every measured step she completed, reinforced a sense of agency and self-determination, a tangible reminder that despite the neglect and absence of her parents, she could assert control over her life and her choices. She resolved to use the solitude, not as a measure of what was lost, but as an opportunity to cultivate resilience, to build strength, and to prepare for the moments when she would stand fully in her power, unshaken by the failings of others. Emily's gaze rested on the city skyline beyond the window, imagining the life that awaited her, a life shaped by her own decisions and fortified by the trials she was enduring. In the quiet of that hospital room, she reaffirmed her commitment to herself, understanding that survival, self-respect, and empowerment were not contingent on others, but rather on the courage and determination she nurtured each day. The past and its betrayals would remain, but they would no longer define her. They would only inform the strength she was cultivating, the clarity of purpose she would carry forward, and the unwavering conviction that she was the author of her own story, resilient and undeterred. Emily Carter's days blurred together in a rhythm of treatment, rest, and quiet reflection, each morning presenting the same challenge: to rise with determination, despite the lingering ache in her body and the emptiness of her family's absence. She would sit by the window, tracing the patterns of the sunlight as it shifted across the city streets, imagining the lives below, imagining what it would feel like to step back into that world fully herself. The thought of her parents, Richard and Linda, and their absence during the most critical moments of her life returned again and again, each memory sharp and insistent, a reminder that she had been forced to rely on herself in ways that should have been unimaginable. Sophie's wedding had been the pinnacle of that neglect, an event where joy and celebration overshadowed the urgent, quiet fight Emily was facing alone. She remembered scrolling through the photos once more, noticing the carefully arranged smiles, the intentional lighting, the perfect angle, so many layers of joy that contrasted brutally with the sterile walls of her hospital room. Emily felt the anger and disbelief rise inside her, but she also felt a deep sense of clarity, a recognition that the people who should have supported her had made their choices, and she could either remain trapped in resentment or use the experience to fuel her own growth. Jason's brief visits and encouraging words over the phone were small lifelines, yet they also highlighted her need to cultivate an inner resilience that could exist independently of others' presence. She reflected on the subtle lessons from Daniel, her brother, whose quiet concern and careful words reminded her that support could take many forms, and that not all family ties were defined by parental attention alone. The room itself became a space of reflection and empowerment, a cocoon where Emily could focus on the essentials, the medications that stabilized her, the exercises that strengthened her body, the mental practices that fortified her resolve. Each task, no matter how routine, was a choice, a small assertion of control in a situation that otherwise felt dictated by circumstances and the neglect of others. As the afternoon light softened, Emily allowed herself to visualize her life beyond these walls, imagining herself walking down familiar streets, independent, confident, and empowered, a stark contrast to the helplessness she had felt when her parents had prioritized their appearances and obligations over her well-being. She contemplated the months ahead, planning each step meticulously, creating a structure that would allow her to meet her needs and maintain her agency throughout treatment. The presence of her stepmother, Margaret, and step-siblings, Chloe and Ethan, had always been peripheral, their concerns rarely intersecting with her reality. But Emily now understood that she could navigate their indifference without allowing it to hinder her path. She made mental notes of strategies to advocate for herself, to cultivate the support of friends, colleagues, and mentors, and to measure her progress not by the attention she received from her parents, but by the tangible achievements she could control. The hum of machines, the soft rustle of nurses' footsteps, and the quiet cityscape outside became companions rather than reminders of isolation. And Emily began to synchronize her inner rhythm with the external world, drawing strength from the constancy that surrounded her. She reflected on the emotional labor required to transform betrayal and neglect into fuel for growth, recognizing that each moment of solitude, each pang of disappointment, was an opportunity to build resilience, patience, and self-reliance. As evening approached, the golden light filtered in through the blinds, softening the harsh lines of the room and bringing a sense of calm. Emily took a deep breath, acknowledging the challenges of the day and the weeks to come, and reaffirmed her commitment to herself. The absence of parental support would no longer dictate her value or her trajectory. Instead, she would define her life through the deliberate, conscious choices she made each day. Each sensation of fatigue, each fleeting moment of pain, became a marker of endurance, a sign that she could withstand more than she had previously imagined. Emily allowed herself to feel the complex interplay of grief, anger, and emerging strength, understanding that the process of facing adversity was not linear but layered, with moments of vulnerability interwoven with growing empowerment. By nightfall, she felt a quiet but powerful sense of agency, a belief that she was actively shaping her future and that the decisions of her parents, once a source of profound disappointment, could no longer diminish her determination. The hospital room, the machines, the solitude, all had transformed into a landscape of potential, a place where Emily Carter could cultivate courage, resilience, and unwavering self-respect, preparing her for the moment she would emerge from this chapter, not defined by neglect, but by her own strength, clarity, and the unshakable conviction that she was capable of creating a life of her own design. Emily Carter spent the early morning hours staring out of the hospital window, the city below awakening slowly, its rhythm contrasting sharply with the stillness inside her room. She could feel the stiffness in her limbs, a reminder of yesterday's treatment, and each breath seemed heavier than the last, yet she faced it with a resolve that had been hard-earned over the past weeks. Her thoughts inevitably returned to the absence of her parents, Richard and Linda, and the cruel reality of their choice to attend Sophie's wedding, rather than be present for their daughter in a critical time. Every detail of that decision replayed in her mind, the vibrant photos online showing her parents smiling, raising glasses, their attention fully consumed by celebration, while she endured the stark antiseptic walls of the hospital alone. The mix of grief and anger simmered beneath her skin, a constant reminder that she had been left to navigate this life-threatening challenge without the support she deserved. Jason's voice on the phone provided brief comfort, but the distance of his military duties meant that the moments of real connection were fleeting, making Emily aware of the strength she needed to cultivate independently. She thought about Daniel, whose quiet concern had been a small comfort, highlighting the difference between deliberate neglect and subtle attempts at connection, even if imperfect. Margaret and the step-siblings, Chloe and Ethan, remained largely removed from her reality, their laughter and daily routines a sharp contrast to the intensity of Emily's struggle, and she internalized the lesson that emotional resilience would need to come from herself. Each moment of discomfort, each procedure, each passing hour became a test of endurance, a measure of her capacity to remain focused and empowered amid physical weakness and emotional isolation. She visualized herself moving through life beyond the hospital, fully healthy, fully present, and fully independent, creating a mental image of strength that contrasted with the helplessness she had felt when abandoned by her parents. The afternoon was marked by careful routines, journal writing, and brief interactions with nurses, each element reinforcing her sense of control and agency in a situation that had initially seemed overwhelming. Emily allowed herself to acknowledge the depth of her pain and frustration, while simultaneously transforming it into a source of motivation, a determination to emerge stronger than circumstances might suggest. The sunlight shifted, warming the room as evening approached, and Emily reflected on the journey she had already undertaken, the mental and emotional fortitude she had built, the strategies for self-care she had implemented, and the understanding that she could not rely on her parents to define her value or safety. The hum of machinery, once intimidating, became a background rhythm that she synchronized with her own thoughts, each beep and hiss marking a step toward empowerment rather than a reminder of vulnerability. She reviewed her plans for the following days, identifying the steps she could take to maintain stability, monitor her health, and preserve her resilience, reinforcing the idea that survival was as much a mental and emotional task as a physical one. Emily contemplated the balance between hope and preparation, recognizing that while the absence of parental support created challenges, it also offered the opportunity to cultivate an inner strength that was fully her own. She allowed herself brief flashes of imagination, walking outside unencumbered, reconnecting with friends, engaging fully in the life she was determined to reclaim each vision, a reinforcement of her agency and a counterpoint to the neglect she had endured. As night fell, casting soft shadows across the room, Emily Carter centered herself, acknowledging the complex interplay of fear, anger, hope, and determination that had carried her this far. She reflected on the lessons learned about trust, self-reliance, and resilience, recognizing that while betrayal and abandonment had marked this chapter of her life, they could not dictate the path she would choose going forward. Every moment of solitude became a crucible for growth, a reminder that she had the power to shape her experiences, to cultivate strength, and to define the terms of her own life. In the quiet of the hospital, she felt a sense of empowerment slowly solidifying, a recognition that she was building a foundation of resilience that would sustain her long after the treatments ended, and that each step she took, however small, was a deliberate move toward reclaiming the life, respect, and independence she deserved. Emily Carter embraced the stillness, the challenges, and the lessons, knowing that the trials of this day, like the days before it, were shaping her into someone capable of enduring, rising, and thriving beyond the neglect she had once faced. Emily Carter woke to the faint sounds of the city beginning its morning routine, the distant hum of traffic blending with the subtle rhythm of the hospital's ventilation system. She stretched lightly, feeling the residual soreness from the previous day's chemotherapy. Yet each ache was a reminder of the resilience she was building, a signal that her body was enduring, healing, and preparing for the days ahead. Her eyes settled on the small collection of photos and personal mementos she had brought from home, each object a fragment of memory, a tether to a past that had not always been kind, yet now served as context for the strength she was cultivating. Thoughts of her parents, Richard and Linda, returned with the same intensity, and she allowed herself a quiet moment to acknowledge the anger and hurt without letting it dominate her focus. Their absence at Sophie's wedding had been more than just a single moment of neglect. It was the culmination of years of subtle favoritism, unspoken comparisons, and choices that consistently devalued her experiences and achievements. Emily recognized the weight of that pattern and committed to letting it inform her boundaries, her understanding of relationships, and the way she would approach trust moving forward. Jason's visits were a welcome reprieve, brief as they were, and she held on to them as evidence that connection could exist, that support could be real even amid distance and duty. Daniel's cautious encouragement reminded her that not all family ties were defined by the failings of her parents, and that relationships could be nurtured with intention rather than assumed by default. Margaret and the step-siblings, Chloe and Ethan, continued their routines largely unaffected by the intensity of Emily's struggle, and while their detachment could have fostered bitterness, Emily instead saw an opportunity to assert independence and cultivate her own sources of support, proving to herself that resilience was a function of inner strength as much as external aid. The day unfolded through a series of routines: vitals monitoring, medication administration, gentle exercises, and deliberate periods of journaling where she poured out thoughts and fears, each word solidifying her control over the narrative of her own life. Emily visualized herself beyond these hospital walls, walking unencumbered through familiar streets, engaging with life fully and confidently, a vivid mental image of empowerment that contrasted sharply with the helplessness she had felt in moments of parental neglect. She allowed herself to confront the full spectrum of emotion, the grief, the frustration, the lingering shock of abandonment, and transform it into fuel for determination, each feeling reinforcing her commitment to persist and reclaim agency. Afternoon brought a quiet intensity, with each procedure and checkup serving as a tangible marker of progress, a testament to her capacity to endure. Emily reflected on the months ahead, each appointment, each therapy, each adjustment to her daily routine, a deliberate act in the orchestration of her recovery. The hum of machines, the soft rustle of nurses, and the faint buzz of distant city sounds became a backdrop for focus and mindfulness. Each auditory cue integrated into a rhythm of perseverance rather than a reminder of isolation. She thought about the subtle victories that had punctuated her days, maintaining composure under stress, finding small moments of joy or amusement, and asserting her needs in ways that had been previously neglected or ignored. These were building blocks of empowerment, each step creating a foundation for the life she intended to lead after treatment. Emily considered the importance of perspective, understanding that while her parents' neglect had caused profound pain, it also offered a lens through which she could evaluate relationships, prioritize genuine support, and cultivate self-respect and agency. The interplay of solitude and reflection became a source of clarity, and she welcomed it as a space to plan, envision, and internalize the lessons of endurance and resilience. As evening approached, the golden light shifted across the room, casting long, calming shadows that softened the clinical lines of the hospital walls, and Emily allowed herself to imagine a future where she had fully reclaimed her independence and strength. She contemplated the steps necessary to sustain both physical recovery and emotional fortitude, from engaging with supportive friends to establishing routines that reinforced her autonomy and health. Each breath, each mindful action, each carefully considered decision became part of a framework for empowerment, a personal roadmap for a life defined by her values, choices, and perseverance rather than by the failures of those who had neglected her. In that quiet, softly lit room, Emily Carter acknowledged the mixture of fear, grief, and growing confidence that had become her constant companion, transforming the experience of abandonment into a crucible for resilience and clarity. She understood that the journey ahead would not be easy, that moments of vulnerability and doubt would persist, but she also recognized the unassailable truth that her strength, determination, and deliberate choices would guide her through the storm. Each passing moment of solitude became a reinforcement of agency, each instance of reflection, a reminder that she was capable of defining her own life, and each conscious step forward, a declaration that she would rise beyond the neglect and betrayal she had endured, emerging with clarity, empowerment, and an unwavering sense of self. Emily Carter felt the morning light filter gently into her hospital room, warming the sterile walls with a subtle promise of a new day. She shifted slightly in the bed, feeling the lingering aches of treatment and the residual tension in her shoulders from days spent bracing herself against pain and loneliness. Her gaze lingered on the window, the city outside bustling with life, oblivious to the quiet battles being fought behind these walls. Jason had called briefly to reassure her, his voice steady but distant, a reminder that support existed even when physical presence could not. Emily drew a deep breath, focusing on the rhythmic sounds of the machines, the gentle hiss of oxygen, and the distant footfalls of nurses, letting them ground her in the present moment. She thought again of her parents, Richard and Linda, and the acute sting of their absence, particularly at Sophie's wedding, where they had chosen celebration over her needs. The memory of that night, vivid and painful, served as both a wound and a mirror, reflecting the long-standing patterns of favoritism and neglect that had shaped her life. Emily allowed herself a surge of anger, but she tempered it with clarity, understanding that the emotions were fuel for her resolve rather than anchors to despair. She considered Daniel, whose quiet support had been a rare but meaningful contrast to the neglect she had endured, and she allowed herself a small smile at the thought of his attempts to help her navigate these difficult moments. Margaret and the step-siblings, Chloe and Ethan, continued in their routines, largely removed from her reality, reinforcing the lesson that resilience and emotional strength would need to come from within. Emily turned to her journal, capturing the minutiae of her thoughts, the ebb and flow of hope and fear, and the emerging understanding that each conscious act of self-care, reflection, and planning was a declaration of autonomy and agency. The day unfolded in a series of deliberate actions, monitoring vitals, receiving medications, completing light exercises, and reflecting on her growth and endurance. Each task, each decision to confront discomfort became a testament to her ability to assert control over her life, despite external neglect. Emily visualized her life beyond the hospital, seeing herself moving through the city streets with confidence, engaging fully in work, relationships, and daily routines, her strength and independence firmly established. The solitude, once suffocating, had become a canvas for cultivating resilience, a space in which she could integrate lessons from past hurt into strategies for empowerment. The hum of equipment, the quiet interactions with medical staff, and the distant sounds of the city coalesced into a rhythm that she could align with, turning the environment itself into a supportive framework rather than a reminder of vulnerability. Emily reflected on the months ahead, the need for careful management of her health, and the necessity of mental and emotional fortitude to navigate the challenges yet to come. The absence of parental support, though a source of deep pain, had illuminated her own capacity to act decisively, to plan with foresight, and to seek connections that genuinely nourished her well-being. She allowed herself to feel the full spectrum of her emotions, the frustration, grief, loneliness, and the growing confidence that she was capable of facing whatever came next. As the afternoon light softened, painting the room in muted golds and ambers, she contemplated the balance between acknowledging past hurt and cultivating future strength. Each breath, each small victory in managing her treatment and her emotions, reinforced a growing sense of autonomy. Emily recognized that resilience was not simply surviving the immediate trials, but actively shaping her narrative, reclaiming power over her experiences, and asserting her right to a life defined by her choices. The quiet city beyond the window mirrored her inner landscape, bustling with energy yet distant, an invitation to engage fully once she stepped back into it. Every measured action, every reflective moment, and every instance of self-assertion built a foundation of confidence and determination, a preparation for the life she would inhabit with clarity and purpose. The evening approached, and the golden light shifted, wrapping the room in warmth and softness. Emily sat in quiet contemplation, acknowledging the challenges she had overcome, the lessons she had internalized, and the fortitude she had nurtured. She understood that the journey of recovery and empowerment was ongoing. Moments of doubt and fatigue would surface, but each was an opportunity to reinforce her agency. In the stillness of the hospital room, surrounded by the gentle hum of life, Emily Carter felt a profound sense of alignment with herself, a recognition that she was actively crafting her own story, reclaiming strength from adversity, and preparing to emerge with resilience, clarity, and unwavering self-determination, fully capable of defining her life on her own terms and rising above the patterns of neglect that had once constrained her. Emily Carter woke to the faint warmth of morning sunlight spilling through the blinds, casting soft golden patterns across the hospital room. Each breath was deliberate, each movement measured as she navigated the lingering soreness from treatment, embracing the discomfort as a marker of her endurance. The gentle hum of the hospital machines and distant footsteps from the hallway became a rhythm she aligned with, a steady reminder that life continued even amid isolation and uncertainty. Her thoughts returned, as they often did, to Richard and Linda, her parents, and the acute awareness of their absence, a wound that still pulsed with each recollection of Sophie's wedding. The images she had seen online, the celebration, the smiles, the joy contrasted sharply with the sterile, quiet room she inhabited, and the contrast deepened her resolve rather than diminishing it. Emily reflected on the patterns that had defined her family dynamic for decades: subtle favoritism, unspoken comparisons, and choices that consistently minimized her presence and her needs. These memories, once sources of quiet pain, now offered a lens through which she could assert control over her own life, learning to navigate relationships and expectations with awareness and intention. Jason's brief visits and encouraging calls served as reminders that connection could exist even at a distance, yet Emily relied primarily on her own strength, understanding that true resilience required independence as well as support. She considered Daniel, whose quiet encouragement had been a rare but meaningful presence, a counterpoint to the neglect and absence of parental care. Margaret and her stepchildren, Chloe and Ethan, remained largely detached from her current reality, a fact that further reinforced the lesson that emotional sustenance could not be assumed but must be cultivated from reliable and consistent sources. The day unfolded through a series of deliberate actions: monitoring her vitals, adhering to medication schedules, engaging in recommended exercises, and journaling her reflections and intentions. Each act, however small, was an assertion of autonomy, a declaration that despite neglect and absence, she could direct her own path. Emily visualized herself walking beyond the hospital walls, fully healthy and strong, engaging with life with confidence and independence, a vision that contrasted vividly with the helplessness she had once felt. She allowed herself to process the full spectrum of her emotions: the grief, the frustration, and the slow emergence of empowerment, understanding that acknowledging pain was as important as cultivating strength. As the afternoon sun shifted, creating long shadows and a softer light, she concentrated on small victories, maintaining composure, asserting her needs, and embracing the growing clarity of her decisions. Each victory, no matter how subtle, fortified her confidence and reinforced the sense that her life was guided by her choices rather than the failings of others. Emily reflected on the future, preparing mentally and emotionally for the months ahead, anticipating the challenges of ongoing treatments, and fortifying herself against potential moments of vulnerability. She recognized that resilience was a multifaceted practice, combining physical endurance, mental focus, and emotional discernment, all of which she was learning to cultivate intentionally. The hum of the machines, the quiet interactions with medical staff, and the distant pulse of the city outside became a backdrop of consistency and support, rather than reminders of isolation, and Emily harmonized her internal rhythm with this environment. She allowed herself to imagine the day when she would leave the hospital, fully empowered, stepping into a world where she was not defined by parental neglect, but by her own fortitude, agency, and wisdom. Each conscious breath, each carefully measured step, and each reflective moment became part of a larger strategy for cultivating autonomy, nurturing resilience, and asserting self-respect. She understood that while betrayal and absence had shaped her journey, they would not dictate its outcome. Instead, they provided clarity, motivation, and a catalyst for deliberate action, compelling her to reclaim authority over her life and to prioritize her own well-being above all else. As evening approached, Emily Carter remained focused and centered, recognizing that the trials she had endured were shaping a foundation of strength that would support her well beyond the hospital walls. She embraced the stillness, the solitude, and the lessons learned, knowing that her growth, determination, and careful cultivation of resilience would guide her through recovery, empower her to face future challenges, and allow her to define her life on her own terms, unshaken by the neglect and choices of those who had once failed to stand by her. The days after my treatment shifted into a rhythm I had not anticipated, quiet, deliberate, and slowly more peaceful. I woke each morning with a lingering ache that reminded me of the fight I had endured, yet the weight of fear and anger had begun to lift, replaced by a sense of clarity and calm I had never experienced before. My home was quieter now. The spaces once filled with tension and uncertainty felt more like mine to inhabit and breathe within. I had learned to honor my own needs, to listen to the quiet nudges of intuition, and to trust that my value was not determined by those who had once turned away. Boundaries became a language of self-respect. Financial decisions, emotional care, and even the simplest daily routines were acts of reclaiming agency. As I looked back, I realized that betrayal, while painful, had taught me discernment, the ability to recognize genuine care from empty gestures, and to cultivate relationships that nurtured rather than drained. I want to tell you, whoever you are, standing there with a similar ache in your heart, that you are allowed to prioritize yourself without guilt, that your boundaries are sacred, and that healing is both a journey and a daily practice. Lean into your intuition, trust the signs the universe or your spirit offers, and allow yourself to step away from what no longer serves your well-being. You are not defined by the neglect or betrayal you have endured. Your resilience, your choices, and the love you cultivate for yourself are what define you. Each moment of self-care, each act of courage, each affirmation of worth is a thread weaving a tapestry of strength that no one can unravel. Let this be a gentle reminder that life continues, and even after profound pain, there is a space for peace, clarity, and renewed connection with yourself and the world around you. Thank you for listening, for sharing this quiet moment with me, and for allowing yourself to feel seen and understood. You are not alone, and the journey toward wholeness, dignity, and freedom is worth every step. I encourage you to leave a comment, share your story if it resonates, or subscribe to follow along. Let the universe guide you gently, and may your intuition and faith always illuminate your path. Emily Carter, 28, and the core lesson I want to share with you is, your worth is defined by your own respect and choices, not by the neglect of others.